This episode is brought to you by JT Clothiers. Hi, I'm Chad Hennings, your host today for Forces of Character podcast, where we have conversations about building a life of impact. My guest today, Kelly Shackelford. This is a gentleman who is a constitutional scholar, adjunct professor. He is the president and CEO of First Liberty, our nation's largest nonprofit legal organization. He's a husband, he's a father, and most importantly, in my book too, he's a grandpa, he's a grandfather.
Amen.
So welcome today, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Chad.
For joining.
Happy to do it.
Let's get to, for our audience, to get to know you a little bit better. Talk about your upbringing. Talk about influences, those that impacted you, who kind of helped direct your life as to where you are today.
You know, this might seem a little different than most would say, but my dad died when I was 2.5, and I had just an incredible single mom. Had to take over the business and really protect and lead me. And I probably had a lot of people growing up telling me, you know what? There's a lot of scripture about God being a father to the fatherless. And I really feel like I was directed and really grew up and protected by the Heavenly Father. And just had an amazing, opportunities. My mom was just an incredibly tough lady for a beautiful, social, but she took over that business. She turned a different side, and she raised me up. It was an oil job middleman at the time, which is not a women's world. And she worked her way eventually into she eventually sold that, became a real estate agent, and she could sell ice cubes to Eskimos. I mean, she was really good. And so moved from a little city in Tennessee to Nashville, Tennessee, and I grew up there, and she got me into the best schools. I tell you, one of the stories, a perfect one, is the best school in really probably, maybe the South, but definitely in Nashville, was an all-boys school, very high academics, and she went over to get me in. Well, I was from a little town in Tennessee and didn't have the background or anything for that, and she just kept going back to the headmaster. And finally he said, "Ma'am, if you'll stop coming, I'll let him come to summer school, and if he can pass, we'll let him in the school." And that's how I got into that school, and ended up in the top 7 in my class, and ended up going to law school. And that was all because my mom was not going to give up.
Very similar to the parable in the Bible about the widow or the elderly lady going to the judge asking for justice all the time. So, but growing up, any male influences aside from your mom? Coaches, teachers, aunts, uncles?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest was I got involved with a group called Young Life. And, I liked it because, I was a high school football player, athlete, all that. And these guys were a little different. It was a ministry, but at the same time, it was kind of more rough and guys and it was like talking a lot of smack. And, and so these guys were kind of, that I didn't have anybody in that role, and so these were guys who were really strong in character. They had these biblical principles that guided their life, and they were great people to have at that time in my life. We'd go out and have competitions with all the guys and stuff, but that framework and a person to talk to and get advice and get feedback and all that. Those are probably the guys that were the leaders. And these, I don't know.
Were these college age?
Typically college age. There was like somebody who was a little older who was married, but then most of the people were volunteers, people who cared about the ministry, which is really just teaching, Bible teaching and fellowship and stuff for people when they go through high school. And these guys were volunteering their time. They were maybe 10 years ahead of me or 8 years ahead of me or whatever, and they were a great influence.
So they were definitely role models.
Absolutely, no doubt.
You had alluded going on to college, get your law degree, also have a seminary degree. Where did that impulse come from?
I knew my gifts were in analytical thinking and speaking, and I thought, well, I either need to be like a pastor or a lawyer. And people were like, That's like a God or Satan choice, is to be a pastor or a lawyer. And, my youth minister was, it was great. I talked to him. He said, look, if you're called to be a minister, it's a wonderful calling. But I will say this. I know a lot of Christian ministers. We sure could use some more Christian lawyers. And as I analyzed my DNA, I realized I'd probably do better at dispensing justice rather than mercy, so I'd probably make a better lawyer, and went to law school and did way better than I should have. I should have been an average student when you looked at intelligence and scores, and because most people in law school have high scores in college, and I did too. But I really spent a lot of my time donating at my local church, my time. To help younger people, disciple them, go through, kind of like I did at Young Life, what I had learned. I did that with younger people, kind of giving back. And that's really a bad kind of plan if you're in law school, because you're supposed to be studying 24/7, and especially if you're average intelligence for that. But yet, when the grades came back, I was making all the high grades. And I just felt like I was being directed, keep your heart for ministry, but do law. I've gifted you in law. And I'm showing you I've gifted you in law. And so got out, clerked for a federal judge for a year, and had all the offers from the big law firms, and I just didn't feel like that's what I was supposed to do. And I remember saying, well, what do you want to do? And I thought, well, I want to use my legal skills because I feel like I've been shown I should do that, but I want to help, pastors, churches, religious freedoms, our founding principles. I'd even like to go to seminary, and I laughed. There's no job like that paid you money. And 2 weeks later, two partners in big national law firms, never met these guys in my life, called me and said, look, we started donating our time for religious freedom, and we're getting so many calls now, it's hurting our ability to make a living. And somebody just told us about you. We were wondering, would you be willing to come on, do legal cases, help pastors, churches, religious freedoms, and our founding principles, and you can even go to seminary part-time if you want to. And they said, if you're willing, our only question is how much you need to live on. And they pitched in out of their pocket, and we started a nonprofit. And, that was 36 years ago.
Wow.
And 36 years later, First Liberty is the largest legal organization in the country that all we do is religious liberty. And I never thought we would ever have a case at the Supreme Court. I mean, it's just me and a secretary at the beginning. We've now had 9 wins at the Supreme Court in the last 6 years alone. So God has much bigger plans than we realize for us sometimes. And it's been an incredible ride to watch what's been going on and the timing and how, I've been directed and really blessed to be able to do what I'm getting to do. And so many heroes I get to represent, we get to represent at First Liberty. I mean, these are great Americans that are standing for the Constitution, are standing for their freedoms, and almost, I can't think of anybody we represented who's not really doing it. The number one motivation for them is to be faithful and to stand for other people's rights. Because it's not about just them in their case, it's almost always about they understand how many other Americans are going to be affected by whether they cave or whether they stand.
I'd like to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what you just shared there. I mean, what a phenomenal ride, journey in life. But one of the principles too that just really kind of was emphasized to me as you were speaking, the importance of role models, that it's not necessarily what they say, but how they lead their lives of service, of those young life leaders that were modeling that for you, that you in turn model that to others. That's how you led your life. So, and that's one thing for those watching, it's important that we're all role models in that
Amen.
regard, and how we demonstrate not just what we say, but by our actions, that someone is always watching you. And, particularly our kids, our grandkids, and those that work for us, is how we handle different situations.
I've been asked a number of times to be in front of younger crowds. And one of the things I've said to them, I said, one of the experiences to me that was so, it kind of shocked me, even though I knew it was true, I really didn't know what it meant, was just being faithful in the little things. I remember when I started doing this work, I was a young 20s guy, and I just did the right thing because I thought you're just supposed to do the right thing. I didn't really ever think it would necessarily benefit me, and sometimes it feels like it's doing the opposite, right? Other people are cutting edges and doing this, and you're just doing the right thing. But your name is a big deal. And after a certain number of years, for me, I don't know, it was 15 years, it's almost like your name goes ahead of you. And God opens doors that you never even tried to open. And people come to you that you didn't even ask to come to you. There is a real blessing that starts to flow like a waterfall after it, but at first you see nothing. But then eventually it's established more in who you are and what your reputation is, and people, that can trust you, feel they can trust you, and people go, that's what I want, not somebody's going to tell me one thing and do. So that is such a big deal that even though I was taught that that's a big deal, I never knew how big of a deal it was.
As
by
the
just
biblical
being
proverb
faithful.
states that a good name is better than silver or gold.
Amen.
And I also subscribe to the thing, having been a football player, where you're in the limelight, read about how you played whatever the day before, it's on the news, that live your life as such that when someone would speak ill of you, no one's going to believe it because of your reputation.
It's a lot bigger deal than I think we talk about today, and I just the side I'm trying to get across to people is you won't do it for selfish reasons, right? You won't do the right thing for selfish reasons. But the reality is, if you'll do the right thing, the blessings that come back to you are so many tenfold over, what you're doing. And it's not talked about a lot, but it's really true.
Okay, just ask the obvious question. Where did that come from? Was that something learned, taught? Did you observe that? Do you know where the genesis of that came from?
I mean, really, it's that training and what the Bible said a good man is and what you should do. There was a lot of times when I was younger, that I did things because I knew that it was right biblically. And I didn't really understand why it was right. I just knew that was the rules, right? And I mean, you think about people when they're young and their hormones are going crazy, right? There's if you have some guardrails that are on you that say really don't do this and don't do that, the disaster that can come from that is much larger than doing the right thing. Now later you look back and you go, wow, I'm glad I followed that approach. And that was the way, really. I always heard a good name was important, always, but I didn't think much about it. I just, when I'm starting an organization and meeting people and doing things, I'm like, I'm never gonna overpromise, right? I'm gonna underpromise and overdeliver. Yeah. I'm gonna be a person of my word. I'm gonna do the little things right, even if nobody's watching, because I know He's watching, and I'm just gonna be faithful. And boy, that really comes back to you, because people can tell what your character is over time, and it makes a big difference. Even if you're in the for-profit world, it makes a big difference in whether people want to do business with you, whether they can trust you, whether they want relationship with you. It's a big deal, I think.
It kind of unpacks regarding identity and what your definition of success truly is, and we'll kind of unpack that on later in our conversation, because that's everything. Identity, who you are, derives everything, is the foundational aspect to everything that we do. But you allude a little differential between running a nonprofit versus a for-profit. I want to kind of talk about transition a little bit. You know who you are, obviously a strong identity, but from a leadership perspective of, not that you've necessarily had the experience of leading a for-profit entity, but how do you explain your leadership style, how you motivate those of your troops, those that work with you and for you. In contrast, a for-profit entity always has that profit motive. They can dangle financial incentives.
Yes.
But how do you lead your nonprofit, First Liberty?
Well, I tell you one thing that comes to my mind immediately, because you'll have an indirect connection to this, is I was asked to speak at one of the military, I won't say it is because I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, but one of the military training deals at one of our very esteemed places. It was on leadership. And right before I was asked to speak, the person before me was from the Kennedy School of Government, and they got up and basically said leadership is all about just knowing your circumstances. And they just talked about it, and it was so devoid of character or who the leader is or whether the leader does things right or wrong, and it just really kind of boiled me up. And I got up and I said, look, if you're not trustworthy, nobody's going to follow you. If you're not a person of character and they can't trust what you say, I said, so the best thing you do as a leader is be someone who is sacrificial, who is a person that says what they mean and will follow through with that. Because otherwise you're not going to follow that person. So the character of the leader is really important if people are going to follow. And you can look at the studies, of course, Good to Great, all these different books that talk about the leader's not usually some proud, it's the humble person, the person who thinks about others, the person who has a good character. That's who people want to follow. And so I think that makes a big difference. And that's, now I will say this, there's a lot of leadership courses, books, I've read a lot of these things, we all have. I know John Maxwell, of course, is great at this, has tons of books, and I've read a lot of his stuff, and I know John. But to me, it's kind of simple in what I do at least, but I think this applies to everybody. I just realized, you know what? I'm a human being. I can only see so much. There's so many things I can't see that could destroy my organization or could be totally the wrong move and I just, at some point, I just realized, you know what? I just need wisdom. I need to rely upon one higher than me. And to me, good leadership is being willing to do the right thing and to pray for the right wisdom and the right people around you to help you with that. And then make the best decisions you can in life, because the reality is, if you're doing anything of significance, you have no idea what one move could do. And so you really need to realize, I need to realize some humility in that I don't have all the answers and I can't see all the future. So I need to do the best with what I can, but I also need a lot of help in making good decisions.
Well, I know you've had some pretty good hires of individuals that you surrounded yourself.
Amen.
I kind of believe in the Reagan principle too, is, delegate, hire the best quality character people around you, delegate and stay the heck out of their way too. Amen. And don't insert yourself.
And I'll say this, look, I've run through this situation just the last few weeks with some people that you've got people are different, right? I mean, there's some people who are real loving and sort of a little more meek and they're just head down, do the work, all that. And then there's some who you would call disruptors. They kind of come in and they're quick starters. They speak before they think sometimes.
Sure.
But you know what? Those people come up with some of the newest, best ideas. So you've got to understand that this diversity is helpful, even though people somewhat irritate people that are different than them. It's great to have those different elements on your team and to try to get them to understand each other enough to go, okay, I know, that's Joe, and maybe he has 10 new ideas every second, and maybe 9 of them are really bad, but one of them is really good. And we need him on the team because he is going to bring things that are not going to come from anybody else. And so that diversity of the team around you, I think, is really important too.
You had mentioned too, as you starting off, I'm curious how you've handled the transition going from where you and an executive assistant in a small office taking on cases now to the country's largest legal religious nonprofit. You have a very unique, I'll call it, quote, business model.
Yes.
Why don't you just kind of give a highlight view of how you're able to leverage other people's talent, but kind of talk about the genesis where you went from you and another person to now where you're at today.
Yeah, every nonprofit legal group in the country has the same model, and it doesn't matter whether they're a left-wing or a right-wing group or whatever their issue is. Raise as much money as you can raise, use that money to hire as many attorneys as you can, put them in an office in DC or LA or New York, and then fly them around the country and cover as many cases as you can cover. That is not our model. Our model is there's all these people of faith who went to law school because they wanted to stand for what was right. They wanted They wanted to, be the guy on the white horse with the saber that comes in and saves the day, right? And 30 years later, these are the best litigators at the best law firms in the country. And they've done honorable work. They've represented major corporations, private equity, you name it. And they've done it honorably, but they've never gotten to do a case for their faith or their country. And so we sit down with those people and we say, look, if we give you everything you need, like on our staff are number one, top 10% of their class of all the major law schools, and all they do is religious liberty. And we've got a media division because these cases tend to be kind of controversial in media. They'll come around you. We'll pay for all your out-of-pockets, the costs. If we bring you everything you need, will you give your time on one of these cases? And they're like, man, I've been waiting my whole life. And they're the big partners. So they give cover to the younger attorneys who would like to work on this kind of case. And we have the most powerful teams in the country on every one of our cases. And their time is all pro bono, it's all donated. And the result of that is twofold. Number one, for an average case, every $10,000 we spend, we get $60,000 donated. So it's like a real leveraging of our resources. But number two, and even more importantly, is the results. If you're a legal nonprofit, you're fighting big industry, government. If you win a case, it's a big deal. That's why you were created, to win one of these big cases. If you win 40% of your cases, you're like really good. We have now won over 90% of our cases every single year for 26 years in a row. And I mean, it's God's favor, but it's also this model, which is, instead of us flying in to some foreign community, bringing our lawyers to win, that is not the way any corporation does their litigation. What does Ford Motor Company do if they're sued in Dallas? They don't just send their Detroit attorneys to Dallas. What they do is they get the best litigators in Dallas, and they have them hook up with their corporate lawyers, and they do the case in Dallas. Every nonprofit does it the other way. We're the only ones that do this way, where if we have a case in Idaho, our attorney is from the best law firm in Idaho, is one of the best lawyers in Idaho, and that team that comes together that we have, or it's like a dream team of the top lawyers in that area of the country, and they're like so happy that they finally get to use their skills for something they really care about. And so we win these cases, and what's great is that sets a precedent that protects everybody's constitutional rights, because those victories don't just apply to that client. Whether it's Coach Kennedy, the coach who got fired for going to a knee, whether it's a little 5-year-old girl named Gabriela Perez who was told she can't pray over a meal at school, whatever the situation is, it's not just that person. It's a precedent that protects millions and millions of Americans.
That's important. I want to kind of transition a little bit. Why religious freedoms, why religious liberties are important. Let's kind of go way back to the beginning of our origination of our country. Why did our founding fathers choose religious liberties, the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights? Why was it that number one?
Well, I mean, I'd say a number of reasons, but number one is that's why they came here, right? I mean, you had the Church of England, you had all these different religious sects that were being persecuted. So we had Quakers, and we had Baptists, and we had all kinds of Congregationalists, all these different denominations that wanted to come to a place where they could live their faith without being attacked by the government. But I also think the founders made this, and they called it our first freedom, because they understood that if you lose this freedom, you will lose all of your freedoms. And so this is why, even if you're not a person of faith, this ought to be at the highest priority on your list for protection. And that sounds a little odd to people sometimes. And I have people all the time, though, that come to me and they say they're from Czechoslovakia, they're from some former Eastern European country where they lost their freedoms. And they tell a story of how the government comes in and they pull down the religious symbols, and then a month later they all lost their political freedoms. And a number of these people are supporting us. They're not people of faith, but they say, you know what? I'm thinking of a guy who just handed me a $5,000 check and said, we're supporting your nonprofit from now on because I want my freedoms. And the best reason I can explain that to people, Chad, is the one thing that a totalitarian regime will never allow are citizens who hold an allegiance to one higher than the government. So whenever you see that power coalition come together, the first flashpoint is always religious freedom. And if you lose that, you'll lose your political freedom, your economic freedom, all of it. And some people might say, I don't know, I understand what you're saying, but is that really true? What just happened in COVID in the United States?
Yeah.
What happened when governors, mayors, county commissioners got power they'd never had before? What was the legal flashpoint? It wasn't suits over businesses being opened and their economic rights. All the law, and we won every COVID case we filed. It was churches and synagogues being shut down while Walmart was open. And the fascinating thing to me is everywhere we won, within 2 weeks of winning on behalf of the church or the synagogue, the businesses were free. They were opened. It wasn't the other way around. So it's exactly what the founders said. Religious freedom is our first freedom. It's the first two clauses in the First Amendment, and there's a reason for that, because it really is the linchpin to everything else. If you don't have a right of conscience, the right to have your own beliefs about the bigger things of life, why you live, who put you here, where you're going after if you don't have that freedom, you don't have any freedom. And so it is the one that even people who are not people of faith ought to watch, because it will affect the freedoms they really care about.
I mean, that's everything. You know, one of our mutual acquaintances, Rod Dreyer, in his book, Live Not by Lies, where he talked about that. And that's a great book for anyone to read. That is, if you don't believe what Kelly's saying, read this book, because Rod went over to some former Eastern Bloc European countries of Poland, of Czechoslovakia, even the Soviet Union, where communism, advanced socialism, Marxism came into play, and it lost. If you kind of just speak towards that a little bit more of what his experience was over there.
It's a powerful book. It really is. I think, a lot of people struggled over the last 5 or 6 years because all this weird sort of cancel culture stuff was going on in the United States, and they didn't understand it. And Rod's book came out at a time where all of a sudden people understood it, because what he did is he went and interviewed all these people from these countries that had gone into communism. And those people are still alive, and many of them are in the United States. And he was interviewing these people to say, this is what is happening. And the short summary, I would say, the question is, what do you do when this type of Marxism or really starts to take away people's freedoms? And what he said is, the way this thing works is, and it's Alexander Solzhenitsyn's famous writing, Live Not by Lies, that it doesn't take a majority of people, but if enough people will stand and speak the truth, it collapses. Because the whole system works on everybody having to go along with the lie. Now, how much of that have we seen in the last few years? We don't know the difference between males and females and all the stuff that was being pushed on the country. Everybody, nobody believed in it. Oh, I say nobody. 80-something% of them didn't believe in it. But how many of those people are willing to say anything? And if not enough are, you lose your country. And fortunately, I think we're seeing a turn and this is all about character, right? Are you willing to stand up and speak the truth, even though it will cost you? And if you are, you can save the country. And that's what happened in all these other countries. It wasn't violence that turned those countries back to freedom. It was almost always, a huge prayer deal or something where people were out saying, we're going to speak the truth, at risk to their own deaths. And everywhere it collapsed, the communism, the Marxism. And each one of those stories, you can see very brave people, sometimes very young people, that are saying, I'm not going to go along with the lie. Whatever it costs me, I'm going to speak the truth.
That reminds me of, I always go back, a universal truth, 80-20. 80% of the people typically will follow the tribe, it's called a prestige bias, someone that they admire as a role model, etc. And there's a conformity bias too, that you want to be a part of the group.
Right.
But 20% of the people will do what's right to your portion. There's an experiment called the Ash conformity experiment, social psychology, where Ash went in and he wanted to see how would people compromise themselves just to be a part of the group. Well, they went around, to make a long story short, they went in and they had a group of actors, and an individual like you as the test case would sit at a table and they'd show different placards, different cards with 4 different lines, a reference line and 3 other lines, and you had to match the length of the reference line to which other A, B, or C the other lines were matched. So they'd go around, and first few they go through and they would say, well, matches A. Everybody get the right answer, but the actors in the subsequent cards, like cards 3 through 10 then, would lie intentionally.
Yeah.
But what they found was that that person, the non-actor, the control group, would actually compromise themselves. 74% of the time, people would lie at least one time just so they'd fit in with the group.
Yes.
So that's human nature. And that's why it's so important for that aspect of what you're talking about, self-reflection. Who am I and who do I choose to be, because it's a choice.
Well, and you know, that study you mentioned, the other fascinating thing about that study to me was if just one other person would say the truth, boy, those numbers dramatically went down. And so people tend to think it's got to be a large number of people. It really doesn't. It needs to be you and your situation. And it's kind of like a lot of our cases, what I see is something happening which is wrong. Persecution, people's rights being taken away, and everybody's kind of sitting back until one person steps forward. And when they do, everybody else steps out and gets behind them. But somebody has to step forward. And that's why I say we get to represent great heroes. They're just regular Americans that all of a sudden are in the crossfires, and it's a tough thing to go through to do these lawsuits, but they're heroes, and they stand not for themselves, but for so many other people. But it takes courage. It takes courage to take that first step.
For over 50 years, JT Clothiers has been a respected family-owned clothing store for men and ladies in Denton, Texas. Whether you're looking for the perfect suit, an elegant top, or unique accessories, JT's offers a personalized shopping experience. The staff not only remembers your name, but also takes the time to understand your style, ensuring you always walk out with something you love. JT Clothiers carries world-class brands from around the globe, bringing you the best in fashion from far and wide. Whether you're shopping for work, play, or something in between, they got you covered. Conveniently located on the corner of Oak and Elm in historic downtown Denton, JT Clothiers is a must-visit destination. Stop by, support local, and let them know you came from Forces of Character podcast to receive 10% off your first purchase. Head over to JT Clothiers today, where timeless style meets personalized service. I think this would be a good time. Let's specifically talk about some of these cases of how one individual, just talk about the Coach Kennedy case, for example, how he, as a former Marine, said, no mas, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to compromise who I am. But the impact that has had on our nation and the Lemon Principle, et cetera, if you just kind of talk towards that.
Yeah, it's a great example of, a lot of cases. But Coach was, he was in the Marine for 20 years. He got out, and they offered him a job as, he was on the shipbuilding in the Navy shipyard was his main job, but they offered him a part-time job also because they knew he was a good leader to be a coach for the local football team. And he's like, you don't know. I've never done anything like that before. I don't know a lot about football X and O's, and they're like, no, that's not why we want you. We want your leadership. And he prayed about it. He wasn't a real religious guy. He'd be the first to tell you he didn't know any verses out of the Bible or anything, but he prayed about it. He said, God, if I'm supposed to do this, show me. And he flips on the TV at 2 a.m. that night. He couldn't sleep, and this movie's on, Facing the Giants, which is about Christians coaching football, and it just blew him away because he felt like God really directly answered his prayer in a way he had never really experienced. And he said, "Okay, I'm making a pledge to you, God. After every game, win or lose, the first thing I'm going to do is, when everybody else is going on the field and slapping everybody on the behind, first thing I'm going to do is go to a knee and thank you for the privilege of coaching these young men." And that's what he did for 7 years until the school came to him and said, if you go to a knee again, we're going to fire you. And he's like, what kind of example am I to these boys if the first time I get under any pressure, I'm just going to throw away their constitutional rights. He's like, why did I fight for 20 years for our country? And he said, I can't do that. And so he went to a knee, and they fired him. And what most people know is 7.5 years later, we finally made it to the Supreme Court. He lost every step of the way. Unfortunately for him, he lived in the Seattle area, not exactly very favorable courts. Ninth Circuit, not exactly very favorable court. We finally got to the Supreme Court, and 6-3, they said that's unconstitutional. He has rights to free speech. He has rights to the free exercise of his religion. And that's what most people know. What they don't know is within the decision, there's a precedent called Lemon that had been in place for 50 years. And what it did is it really misinterpreted the Constitution years ago to say that the government, anywhere the government is, religion can't be. Because it's like there's some principle of separation of church and state, which those words are not in the Constitution. We don't want an establishment of religion, is what the Constitution says. And so that precedent has been used for 50 years, over 7,000 citations to try to quelch religious expression in public.
So give examples of what religious expression in public would be.
So for instance,
some common things.
Nativity scenes at Christmas on the lawn, banned. A menorah for Hanukkah on the lawn of a city or a county, not allowed. A Ten Commandments is out in public. Oh, you got to push that into the closet. Some kid is doing something religious at school. Well, they're at school, and that's, this is a government school, so, so we could go on and on and on. Why? Because any of those things are in the Constitution? No. The founders would have been appalled at this idea because of the Lemon case. That's why it was happening. And in Kennedy, 3 or 4 pages into the opinion, they say, Lemon is over. All this hostility to religion is over. We don't ever want the government to coerce anybody with regard to religion, but outside of that, we have total free exercise of religion. We're not going to fire coaches for going to a knee. We're not going to, everywhere that they push the Ten Commandments in the closet, it can come back out. And this is a big change because we've kind of created what would have been referred to as a naked public square where religion was kind of banned. And this is really damaging to our country. This country was built on religious freedom. And the idea that you can't have Jewish or Christian or whatever displays and recognize the religious nature of most of our citizens and the good it is for society. Look at most of our hospitals and there's so many great things going on, but yet to push those into the corner has been really damaging. This case being overturned is going to really change a lot that. And if you start watching, you'll probably see nativity scenes going up at Christmas and menorahs at Hanukkah and more of celebrating who we are as a country, that we're religious people with a religious background, which is why we're so rare. We actually think that our liberties come from God and no government can take them away. Most countries are not like that. So it's a unique thing, America, and this gets us back to who we are. But all of that happened because one knucklehead, Coach Kennedy, he'll be the first one to tell you he's a knucklehead. He is a knucklehead because he did the right thing and he stood up. And it was hard. That's 7.5 years is a long time to go. And I watched him. I remember we were outside the Supreme Court right before the argument, and he looked at me and he said, "Man, I'm scared." I said, "What are you scared of?" He said, "My name is on this opinion. What if it's bad and it takes away people's constitutional rights?" And turned out to be exactly the opposite. But he was faithful and blessed really all Americans now, more religious freedom than we've had in 50 years in that area.
Any law firm just to argue a case before the Supreme Court would be an honor and a privilege. But to have 9 cases and to go 9-0, that's a heck of a batting percentage. Yeah. Win 9 cases, that's unheard of. Just give us a quick highlight of some of those cases and the impact, like the overturning of the Lemon principle, the other cases have had.
A really big one that I think is very seldom talked about in the last 3 years that we won, but that I think might have the biggest impact of any of them, is a case called Groff versus U.S. Postal Service. And that's the reason I'm saying this is because religious freedom in the workplace is a big deal, because most people spend most of their waking hours at work. And so this affects a lot of people. And every day right now we see a reference to that case. Every day in cases, in media. So what is the case? Well, Gerald Groff was a guy who really had strong beliefs about not working on the Sabbath. Those are strong religious beliefs. And so he went to the U.S. Postal Service because, he figured they don't deliver on Sunday. And then 2 years later, they worked this deal out with Amazon and start delivering on Sunday. And he's like, look, I'll do double shifts on Saturday, which, people would like to be home Saturday with their kids. I'll take other people's shifts. I'll do whatever you need, but I can't do this. This violates my faith. Well, there's a law that we've had for a long time that says, look, we're going to do everything we can to accommodate people's religion at work. And so, for instance, if you have shifts and you can take the Orthodox Jew who can't work Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, or the Seventh-day Adventist who has similar beliefs, if you can switch a schedule around, you should do that. And so it's been a law for a long time. But 47 years ago, the Supreme Court, in a really dishonest opinion, reinterpreted all the words to take away all the protection. And so the post office said, well, we know there's this law, but we really don't have to follow it. So see you, Gerald Groff. And we filed a lawsuit. We did something a little different at the Supreme Court. We wouldn't usually do this, but we just thought it was true. We said to the court, look, this decision from 47 years ago was a lie then, and it's a lie now. This is not what these words mean. And you know it's not what these words mean. And the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in our favor. And they restored that protection in the workplace at a time when it was getting a little crazy, right? People being fired from using the wrong pronouns. And, well, now they have protection, right? I mean, people's faith really shouldn't be a part of why you are firing them from work because you don't like their religious beliefs. This is now going to have, and so hundreds of millions of Americans now have protection and freedom that they didn't have. And that, to me, is a really significant case going forward. And we're already seeing the impact of it. Another one is the school choice case. There was a school choice case out of Maine where they allowed school choice, but they wouldn't allow the parents to pick any religious schools. And we won at the Supreme Court 6-3 that you can't do that. You can't, that's discrimination against all the religious schools. You got to treat everybody the same. And that'll be important because much of the country is now choosing school choice. And the idea that 85% of the private schools are religious schools. So that would be a big deal. Well, they're all now protected. The other one, which you're well aware of, Chad, is, because you're a veteran, is the Bladensburg Cross case right outside of D.C. In fact, there's a celebration. When is that? Within the next month of the 100-year celebration of that Veterans Memorial. Cool Veterans Memorial put up right outside of D.C. in Bladensburg, Maryland, to honor the 25 young men who lost their lives in World War I from that little county. One of the things cool about that to me is at that time, there were 30,000 Klan members marching on D.C. There was a lot of racial tension. There were segregated forces. But yet on that monument, those 25 names were in alphabetical order, black and white. Didn't matter. And sat there for almost 100 years until the American humanists came along and said, you can't have that memorial because it's a cross. Well, anybody who knows World War I knows the image of World War I all over the world because of the gravestones that are over there and so many people dying was a cross. And believe it or not, we get to the Federal Court of Appeals and one of the judges says, why don't we just cut the arms of the cross off? That way nobody will be offended and we won't have to tear it down. And sure enough, they ruled 2-1 unconstitutional. So we went to the Supreme Court. We said, this is not right. This is because of this Lemon case, which we hadn't overturned yet. And this was the first crack in the armor on that. We said that case is wrong. This is hostility to religion. There's nothing wrong with having a veterans memorial that has a religious symbol. And the court agreed with us 7-2. They said, this is not unconstitutional. That memorial stands, and it still stands to this day.
That's impact. Just briefly here too, talk about some of the other programs and other initiatives that First Liberty is involved with regarding valuation of judges, et cetera, and the other programs, education also.
We, gosh, there's a lot. One of them is, I mentioned the Coach Kennedy case, this change in the law, this opening up now of communities being able to have religious displays. The problem is, everybody's been trained for 50 years, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. And so we realized, we've won, but it's no good if people don't know that they can, bring faith back into their community. So we started an effort called Restoring Faith in America, which is simply just people taking their own community back and doing these things. And I tell you, we just started this about a year ago, and it's amazing what we're seeing happen now. Legislators have been coming to us. There are laws passing all over the country about the Ten Commandments, which have been kind of ripped out of the schools when it's part of our historical and legal background. And we have a religious background in the country. Religion does have an influence, and the idea that you couldn't talk about those things, that's changing, as well as nativity scenes at Christmas and Ten Commandments. Kentucky is about to put its Ten Commandments back on the lawn. It had taken it down. I think Indiana's looking at it. I could go on and on and on. Georgia we're helping with a couple of other groups. They're putting up historical documents in all the courthouses, including the Ten Commandments, and just different things that show you about our founding and our history. And so that's one, just pure education and really empowering people in their own communities to do things. They don't have to wait for anybody. They don't have to get lawyers. It's already over. We've already won. So it's just going and doing it. The judges, religious freedoms are not going to be protected if we don't have judges that think they should follow the Constitution. So we've really made a priority of ours is to do the most extensive analysis of every possible judicial, because these are lifetime appointments to the federal bench. And we've been doing that for 8 years. We now have more data on federal judge choices than anyone in the country. And we provide that because we want the best judges on the court, ones who want to follow the Constitution. And that obviously affects religious freedom. It affects a lot more than that. It affects everybody's constitutional rights, their freedoms under the law. So that's one of the things we do. And then we do a lot of education. We have a think tank that goes at high levels, but we're also working on things. One of the things we're working on right now is creating a curriculum that can be used in our schools, in like high schools and below, to teach them about religious freedom, the history of our country, as well as civics. Just most people don't know a lot about our country. You ask the average person what's in the First Amendment, they might not can tell you any of the 5 freedoms protected in the First Amendment. So just some things, because if our youth don't know, then they won't know if it's taken away. So we need to do what we can there education-wise. And so we've got a lot of things that we're doing there to try, in addition to internships and all that we do every summer with both law students and just college students and others.
Our culture has waved back and forth, over the last 100 plus years. During your journey with these 30 plus years regarding leading First Liberty, has your perspective changed regarding, after fighting all these different battles that you have regarding our culture from where it was, 20 years ago to today? Is there a sense of optimism or pessimism?
Well, we've had a good number of years where there are a lot of really bad cases that were not what the Constitution says. And they really tried to suppress religious freedom. And these wins that we got, really the 3 big ones, 3 of the big ones I just mentioned, within about a 13-month period, which is just crazy. That didn't happen. They really brought back freedoms that most Americans have never seen in their lifetime. And so it's kind of crazy because most people don't feel it because the hostility is kind of greater. There's a lot of hostility going on in our culture. But I can say this with absolute certainty because I've lived in this area for a long time. Every American alive right now has more religious freedom than they've ever had in their lifetime. And I think we're just at the beginning of this. Because right now, we've got a Supreme Court who, and this just shocks people, but they're originalist, meaning their judicial philosophy is, what is the original meaning of the text? And you think, well, isn't that what they all do? No, it wasn't. We had a lot of evolution. The Constitution is an evolving document. And so they would just take it and, quote, interpret it based upon what they think it should mean now. Well, that's very pliable, and you can just kind of make whatever you want. And that's where we got a lot of these bad decisions. We've got a court now that they might disagree on what the original meaning was, but they think their job is to find it. And when you do that, when you go and you look at the Constitution and what was really meant, what it really says, it starts to change things. And it gets us back to those fundamental principles that they were trying to enshrine here of freedom and protection when they came here. And so I think we're just at the beginning of religious freedom being restored more fully. There's a number of areas that are off, and they affect more than religious freedom. Obviously, they go outside. Like we just had a case just in the last week. The Supreme Court mentioned in a decision, they cited to one of our cases and said this area has got to be cleaned up. And what it was is people that bring cases for discrimination in the workplace. There's a weird case that kind of creates some hurdles for, even if you have discrimination, of ever even getting your day in court. And it's just being totally misinterpreted. Well, we asked the court to take that case about 6 months ago. We had a case that dealt with that, and they didn't. There were 3 of the justices that wanted to take it, but everybody else wasn't. And so that whole thing affects not just religious freedom in the workplace, discrimination on the basis of your race, of your sex, of other areas, right? And so as they go back and clean this up to what the law says and not what things have kind of, been warped into saying with other opinions that are not accurate, it brings us back to more clarity, more protection, more freedom. And I just think we're just at the beginning of a good move for those who care about the Constitution and our freedoms.
That kind of reminds me, you mentioned education and educating people. What you don't know, but it reminds me of what Hayek quoted, I think, in The Road to Serfdom, where he said, when words lose meaning, people lose liberty.
Amen. That's exactly right.
So when people try to change perspective, that slow drip. And that's, that just reminds me, it's the importance that politics is downwind of culture. And what impacts culture? It's your faith, it's your perspective. It ultimately, for an individual, it's their identity. And this is where I want to kind of land this plane as we go. Kelly's out, giving you a definition of identity. If identity is, that it's that filter that you pass your thoughts, your words, your experiences through that provide that meaning, purpose, an impact in your life. How would you define your identity?
Well, in this, I don't know if people who are not of faith will understand it, but it's just mine. My favorite verse, that's really my life verse, is out of Acts chapter 5, verse 40. And it said, they called the apostles in and they had them flogged. And they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus. And it said, the next line is what has always blown me away and is the challenge to me on identity. It said, the apostles left the Sanhedrin rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for his name. Their identity was in Christ, in their faith. And when you have that identity, you're going to have joy, because even the persecution is seen through a very different lens of just being faithful. And so for me, I'm not there yet. I don't think I'd rejoice at being flogged, but I'm hoping to get there someday. I think that identity is so important, because if you don't, you'll get pushed into whatever cultural thing is going on, and your identity, you become kind of whatever people are pressuring you to be at the moment.
Again, it's that 80-20 rule.
Yes.
That conformity aspect. Who are you conforming to and conforming to be? Give you the last word here. What would you say to that person out there that's maybe struggling with resistance, or have obstacles in the workplace, at school, in the military, in their local community government, against their belief system?
All right.
how would you encourage them, and what would you say to them?
I would just say this country was built to protect your freedoms. I mean, that literally is the reason these people came here. And so the laws are imbued with all these protections for you. Call us, if you have a situation and you don't know what your rights are, we're happy to answer those things, free of charge and totally confidentially, whether it's the workplace, whether it's at the government, whether it's in the community, whatever it is, whether it's in the military. I mean, we won a huge Navy SEALs case that ended up protecting everybody in the Air Force, the Marine, everybody. We would have lost probably 50,000 of our military families if we hadn't won that case. And it was a really important religious liberty case. So no matter where you are, you have these protections. That's what people have fought and died for in this country. And we just need to be faithful in standing up for those. And so I would tell people, call us. I would also, and then you're going to need to have the courage to stand, but we'll at least tell you what your rights are, how to do it, all that. And we'll, in any case, it's a religious freedom case, we're happy to help. And the lawyers are free. The other thing I would say, though, is you need to be educated a little bit. And I would encourage everybody that hears this, you're not going to get this information of what's happening if you're not on some sort of list where you're getting the info. So you could go to our website, which is, you just spell out firstliberty.org and firstliberty.org. And if you go down just a little bit, it'll say be an insider. And you can put your email in there. We'll never give it to anybody else. We don't do that. We have probably, I think, around 700,000 people who have subscribed saying, I want this every Friday. And again, no cost. And we'll take the 4 or 5 biggest things that happen every week that affect that issue. And what you'll find is you'll see things and you'll realize we're not losing, we're winning. The law is on our side. And I hope everybody will be kind of the Paul Revere to their friends and say, hey, look, I want you to see this case. Because what'll happen is when more people know what their freedoms are, they're more willing to live those out. And if they live them out, the more people will get more freedom. I mean, it really is it's like a snowball, right, in a good way. And so I just encourage people to get the information, pray for the people in the middle of these battles, but then also share these victories that are going on every day. I mean, we've had, maybe 6 victories in the last week and a half. I mean, it's just happening all the time. People are having to stand, but when they do, they win. And I think people will be encouraged if they get that information and can even be a person who's a leader to their friends to get that information to them.
Amen. Knowledge is power, and it's also make sure that your perception is based on reality.
Yes.
And what's true. So, Kelly, thank you so much. You've been very enlightening, and I appreciate to call you a friend, and thank you once again for doing this. And for those of you, if you've enjoyed what you've experienced here, follow us on social media. Go to my website, chadhennings.com, to learn more about what we're trying to do with Forces of Character podcast. But first and foremost, as we've talked about, go out and live life, be a force of character. Thank you, and see you next time.